Hello everyone, welcome to 27. I've been wanting to talk about classic car prices for a while and why I think that they are going to plummet.
Dealers are desperately trying to acquire stock because they're selling very quickly, and the demand is almost at an all-time high at the moment.
Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and today I'm going to talk to you about classic cars. More specifically, a few years ago, about 3 years ago I think it was, I made a video on why classic car prices would plummet. It was, funnily enough, one of my most successful videos in terms of views, but clearly it hasn't happened so far. So why is that? So today we're going to be looking at a few things. We're going to be looking at classic car prices and why they have gone up, especially considering the current climate where you would not expect them to. Secondly, we're going to be looking at Porsche and why Porsche in particular always seems to outperform the rest of the market. And then thirdly, we're going to be looking at the longer term outlook for classics. And today we also have a special guest in Ed Lovett. Ed founded Collecting Cars here in the UK, which has really disrupted the market in terms of selling cars. Now, this isn't a paid promotion, by the way. I just like the site. What I really like about it, it's an online auction. It's a bit like Bring a Trailer in the US, but the market that they're targeting is much more sort of towards the car enthusiast. Anyway, let's see what Ed thinks about classic car prices and what they've been doing in the last few months.
So I think in general the demand over the last 6 months has been particularly high, and it has definitely been stronger for certain models, young timer iconic cars, Porsche, certain Ferraris. But that science doesn't go across the board. You know, I think we've definitely seen vintage cars are seeing a decline just because the audience is shrinking. And as we get more into the modern cars, electrification, hybrids, you know, similar gearbox styles, performance characteristics, I think that people are finding a niche in a particular era. And Porsche, I think we discussed this the other day, that, you know, Porsche have really seen the GT product, especially 997 manual GT3s. They're particularly hot news at the moment.
Ed mentions that vintage cars are down because of a shrinking audience. Now take note of that, because we're going to go back to that later on when we're talking about the long-term outlook. But secondly, he confirms that the market is on a high and it is up. And I think that's quite odd considering what's happening, and with COVID, I think most predictions would have been that the market would have crashed, and it hasn't. Why is that?
I don't think any of us knew we were going into lockdown for 3 months, and gradually, as people started to sort of get accustomed to lockdown, probably many millions of families saving themselves thousands or tens of thousands of pounds on not going on holiday that Easter, cancelling their summer holidays, perhaps saving money from commuting into the office, saving money from going out to pubs and restaurants. But, you know, very quickly, people have thought, oh, hang on a second, I've got, you know, £10,000, £50,000, £100,000 that I didn't expect to have. And that £150,000 Ferrari might have been £130,000 during that first lockdown period. So the guy that was feeling brave enough, who'd saved up his money, not going on holiday, was quite keen to buy that car because he thought, you know, when we come out of COVID, these prices are going to go back up, and I would have bought it very well. Looking back, he was right, the guy who was buying the car for £130,000, because that 488 today would probably be £155,000 or £160,000.
I agree that some of us definitely have more disposable income because we're not going on foreign holidays, we're not going to pubs, bars, restaurants and so on. So that's definitely a factor. I will also add two other things to this. The first is simply that everybody during lockdown has had more time. So there's never been a better time to think, well, I'm going to get that old classic project because I've got time to work on it. Secondly, and maybe more importantly, it's the monetary policy that I think has been followed in most Western countries, which is just to print money, which is the same as reducing interest rates. Both those things always have the effect of increasing prices on classics. It's really interesting that Porsche continues to buck the trends in the market and just consistently outperforms the market. And, you know, if you look at, for example, my own 308, well, that's quite an exclusive car. It's quite an exotic car, and yet it is worth very similar amounts to Carrera 3.2s of the same sort of condition and mileage it's maybe worth a little bit more, but not much. Or even 964s like this. These are all cars that are more common than the 308, so they should be worth less, and they're not. So there's also the example that was made of the 997 GT3 RS, GT3 manuals. So why is it that Porsche just continues to buck the trends with regards to the market? Why does it always outperform?
I think that there's several reasons. I think it's very well understood as a brand. I don't think it's seen in the same way as other supercars. So if you go and drive a red Ferrari down the street, you might get some kids giving you a thumbs up, and you might get some other people sticking their middle finger up at you thinking you're poncing around. I think you can get away with a 911, whether we're in a recession or whether we're in an economic boom. I think you can justify driving a 911. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is, and I've always said this with it, you know, a lot of what I do is based around Porsche because it's so liquid as an asset. And you know, to a certain degree, it's almost a currency. So if you have a 3.2 Carrera with 67,000 miles in Guards Red and you price it at £78,000, you will probably sell the car within about 30 minutes of advertising it. If you advertise that car at £82,000, you probably won't, because people know the value of these cars. So they're very easy to trade in and out of. So that's another thing. And so people really understand the values. If you go and start looking for 308s today, you might get one guy asking 38 grand, one guy might be asking £98,000, and for no real reason that the consumer understands why there's this disparity in prices. Now, some guy might say, well, I've got all the tax discs back to 1978 or something like that. But, you know, there's just a big gap, a big wide spread in the market. And then finally, if you Google wherever you live, Porsche specialist, there's probably going to be 10 that pops up within about an hour's drive from you. If you type in Ferrari specialist, there's probably going to be one within an hour's drive from you. So I think just in terms of owning it, maintaining it, you know, having enough people to go to, competitive market, it feels like a safe bet.
So some really interesting points there. I think in particular, what Ed is saying in regards to the liquidity of the cars, and that is just that they're so well known, the values are so well established, that Porsche's almost become like a commodity. I think his last point about, you know, if you want to get your Porsche serviced, there's going to be a multitude of garages, it's not the same with Ferrari and so on. That's absolutely true, but it just feeds into the wider thing about Porsches, which is the reputation that they have for usability. So I think it's easier to justify getting a Porsche rather than a Ferrari, because even though maybe it's not actually true, you can pretend that it's going to be a usable car. But what I'm really interested in hearing from you is your view about the long-term prospects.
Buy what you want because you love it and for the right reasons. That would be very important to me. Saying that, you know, just a general view is, you know, the world is changing. It's changing very quickly. You know, electrification, taxation. ULIS is moving out in October in London to the North and South Circular. Now, if it's happening in London, it's going to happen in Bristol, Manchester, Birmingham, you know, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and other cities around the world. That's going to have an effect on people wanting to own these cars for the reason of using them and keeping them outside their houses. Now, that doesn't mean they can't keep them outside of the cities or outside of London and just use them at weekends, etc., etc. But the usability of some of these cars is going to become more challenging, and you would think that might affect the values. However, I think what we do continue to see is, you know, people are diversifying their investments, and it might be that there is a nostalgic element to owning a combustion engine while everyone's driving around central London in Ubers and Teslas, etc.
The fact that some older cars have been banned from city centres is definitely a worry, but I would also add to that some other issues. A few years ago, I did a review of a Morris Minor that had been converted to electric. That was by London Electric Cars. And Matthew there told me that he expected that in future it would become socially unacceptable to use petrol cars in cities.
And I think in the future people will struggle to run petrol engine. Petrol will become increasingly difficult to get, frowned upon. I think it'll be viewed in the same way as someone smoking. If you were to light a cigarette in a crowded area, people would turn around and ask you what you're doing. And I think you'll see the same thing if you drive a petrol engine into the centre of town.
And at the time I thought he was crazy, but looking back now, attitudes are definitely shifting, so that's definitely a worry. Now, I'm really interested to hear what you think, your viewers, of long term and what's going to happen there. And also from viewers who are not from the UK. Now, the picture I painted is obviously UK specific, but I think it's being followed in most other countries. But do let me know what the situation is where you are and what you think is going to be happening in the future. Thank you so much for watching. Do subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. And if you need to contact me, Instagram is the best way. Thank you so much and see you for the next one.